We've all seen the movies where the babies get swapped in the hospital and the parents take the wrong one home. Never in a million years did I think this was something I'd have to worry about, but yes, it did actually happen to us. I had my little girl Isabella last September, and I knew she was going to have to stay in hospital for a few days as she was going to go through some drug withdrawals. After 48 hours in the hospital, Isabella was put under a phototherapy lamp, and because of her condition, she needed to be monitored very closely. So her cot was put across the hall from me in a little nursery, and she was the only baby in there. She was being monitored every 2 hours by the nurses, so they definitely knew who me and Isabella were. But night number 2 in the hospital is when the unthinkable happened, and I was given the complete wrong baby. I'd woken up at about 3 a.m. and I went into Isabella's nursery to go and say hello to her, and she was in her cot at this point. I then went off to the toilet, and on my way back, the nurses called me into the office because they had Isabella in there. This did raise a few little red flags, just because I was told she wasn't allowed out of her phototherapy lamp. And of course, I did ask them, but the midwives explained to me that they had her in the office because she'd been crying loads and she just wouldn't settle, which I knew was really unlikely to be Bella because she was so poorly, she did not cry. My first thought was, oh my goodness, I've just been cuddling someone else's baby in the nursery that wasn't Isabella under the phototherapy lamp. But again, I was 2 days postpartum and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, so I just took the baby off them and I went back to bed. When the midwives came to do Isabella's obs, they were saying how much she looked like me. And again, in my head, I was thinking earlier you were saying how much she looked like her dad, but it is what it is. After a couple of hours just before breakfast, I asked the nurses when Isabella needed to go back underneath her lamp because it had been quite a long time now. So they told me to get her undressed and ready and she'll go double check with the other midwives. And I changed Isabella's nappy at this point. When I tell you I nearly had a heart attack, I pulled down her nappy and I was greeted with a little... Isabella was definitely born a girl, so I honestly nearly passed out and I pressed that emergency button. I was probably being really impatient, but nobody turned up for about a minute, so I picked up the baby and I stormed into the office. All I saw was red and I was demanding for them to tell me where Isabella was because this was not my baby. At first, I honestly think they thought I was joking, but then I told them that this was a little boy and their faces went white. The reasoning behind it was apparently because I looked identical to this little boy's mum, so they just thought that I was her without checking. And then for the rest of the 5 days I was there, it was never spoken about again. I'm not even sure if the other mum knew what happened, which is really worrying, especially because Isabella was poorly. I can't imagine what would have happened if they'd given this little boy some of her medications. And that's when the story leads on to Daniel stealing the entire hospital crib. So if you do want to hear about that, definitely come back for another story time.
I think, as a mother, I'm not a mother myself, but if I put myself in her shoes, I would completely blame the other person. It doesn't matter where they're from, it doesn't matter who they are, who they work for, gender, whatever. At the end of the day, you have a duty of care, and if they've not looked after your baby and yourself properly, then as a mother, you would hit the roof. Do you know what I mean? I think her feelings are so valid, and yes, and if you are involved in a legal action, you cannot tell the story too much. Don't blame for doing a bit of clickbait, but I think people are forgetting that this mother just gave birth to her baby and her baby was swapped. Do you know what I mean? I don't really understand why people are getting so upset by the fact, she said it was a boy, she nurses do this, nurses do that. Her baby got swapped.